All right, it looks like we're live. So, Dr. Hovind, last time we talked, you mentioned a lot about mutations being deleterious, how they damage things, and I wanted to ask about that. Do you think that all mutations are deleterious, or are some of them positive, some of them neutral?
Well, first of all, it's good to be with you again. I thought you were calling to say you got converted. Not yet. Take one more program. All known mutations are harmful, fatal, or neutral. They do nothing. Or blend back into the population. One has a mutation and there's 10 million other in the herd, so it doesn't ever take over a population. It has never been demonstrated scientifically that a mutation can be beneficial and take over a population of anything. It is pure SpongeBob imagination to believe that it happens, and people do believe it, obviously. The evolutionists all believe that, but it's not demonstrable science. So I'm not aware of any. If you know of a mutation that was beneficial, that took over population, that added new information, I'd love to hear about it.
Oh, I'm just asking questions right now. So if all mutations are deleterious, then that means eventually, after a certain number of generations, humans won't be able to live anymore, because if we have too much junk DNA, on your perspective, then we won't be able to survive, correct? So there's some...
Well, I wouldn't say that. No, I said all mutations are harmful, fatal, or neutral. They do nothing. If a switch on my car stops working that controls the wobulator shaft, nobody cares. It doesn't matter. The car still runs. So humans can still run with a lot of mutations. I think the average human is estimated carries about 3,500 defective genes that don't work anymore. We can no longer create our own vitamin C, and most other animals can. When a squirrel or a rabbit or a goat gets scared, it creates their own vitamin C. It actually ends up being good for them. But humans cannot do that. My understanding, you can call Bill Sardi, knowledgeofhealth.com. He would tell you that the humans have a broken gene that normally would create vitamin C, and now it doesn't work. But that's an example of losing something, not gaining. And it's not necessarily fatal. It doesn't mean all humans are going to die, but it is a nuisance. We have to take a lot of vitamin C. So, yeah, okay, go ahead.
So does that mean that after a while, if we keep gaining these neutral and negative mutations, then our humanity is going to start to decay after a long time, like lots and lots and lots of generations after gaining these negative mutations? Eventually, life won't be possible anymore because we have too many of these, eventually, long time from now.
That is probably true. I don't know how you could demonstrate that, but I think we could point out that we probably already have quite a few drawbacks to humanity in general. We may be much weaker in many ways than our ancestors were, 2,000 years ago. I think we are accumulating a genetic load that's going to become a problem. Now, how long would that take to kill everybody in the world? There's no way to answer a question like that.
All right, so do you think there are other organisms like viruses, single-celled organisms, and bacteria which have the fastest mutation rates and the smallest genome sizes, and they're also probably experiencing this, correct? This genetic load?
Well, because some mutations, if they're bad enough, they're fatal. I mean, it takes it out of circulation. So probably not. It wouldn't affect the whole population because the bad ones simply die. How many birds are there in the world? Billions. And if, 50 of them get a mutation and it kills them, nobody notices. The ones without that mutation would take over. So I think you're assuming that if one gets a mutation, it somehow affects all of them, which is simply not true. There's a whole herd of animals that would have to be affected. So if one human gets a mutation, how long would it take for that to affect the entire world? It probably never would, because the entire world is not interbreeding. It may affect a population. There probably are some civilizations that have gone completely extinct because of maybe, I know some Indian tribes were nearly wiped out because the white men brought in strange, diseases to them. This happens in Africa occasionally, where a missionary or somebody goes in and discovers a whole tribe is suffering from a problem. But not too many people in Scotland or in Norway or in Alabama mate with those people from Congo. So I don't think you could say that it would take over the whole world and be a danger. It may wipe out a tribe or a certain segment of a population, but I doubt there's any evidence that it would take over the whole world.
I mean, like viruses and bacteria and single-celled organisms themselves, when they divide, they also experience mutation amongst the viruses. So the viruses are also going to decay on their own. So eventually the viruses and the bacteria and the single-celled organisms are also going to die off because they have too much genetic baggage as well, correct?
I think we see that. I think we've seen some diseases, as far as we can tell, completely eradicated from humanity because of, whatever intervention by man or maybe just climate. So eliminating a virus or a bacteria, again, would go back to the same point that this may or may not ever affect the whole planet. I don't think some people use this, some virus or bacteria gets into and 5 people get sick or die from it, and the Congress uses that as an excuse to make a law that affects all 330 million Americans, which I think is stupid. It's not going to affect all 330 million Americans because 5 people died of a particular virus. Viruses can spread, and bacteria and various diseases can certainly spread, but generally it's to the weaker organisms. Those that have good diet, good nutrition, good hygiene are probably not going to get that. Certain people like in contact with animal feces are likely to get things that other people who are not in contact with animal feces, farmers, for example, are probably not going to get that. So I wouldn't panic over it. And I certainly wouldn't, say Congress ought to pass a law now because 5 people died of a virus. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but what I'm thinking is that if everything experiences genetic decay and genetic load, and viruses and bacteria reproduce at a rate about 1 time every 30 minutes, so if we extend that out to about 6,000 years, that's millions and millions of mutations, millions and millions of reproductions and mutations to each generation. So if it seems that if you're right and that all mutations are either deleterious or neutral, then it seems that the amount of damage done to the genes in viruses and bacteria would have killed them off a long time ago. They wouldn't be able to survive anymore because of how much mutation they'd have in the past 6,000 years because they reproduce so fast and their genes are so small.
Well, 2 things we'd have to look at. One is what is causing the mutation in the bacteria or the virus, and has this always been going on? I don't think there's any way to show that. Certainly there are certain environmental factors that would involve increasing mutation rate. Solar sunspot cycle probably does that, with just more radiation coming in out of every 11 years, you go through a solar sunspot cycle. So yeah, I think I would agree that certainly viruses and bacteria have mutations, but then if the vast majority of those simply die, then they don't reproduce and spread that to the next generation. And so I doubt we're going to see a major shift in viruses or bacteria. And certainly there's no evidence that this is ever going to take over the population of the bacteria or the virus, either one. So if somebody wants to imagine that, I think what you're driving at is trying to get some kind of evidence for evolution, because you seem to like that theory. I wouldn't buy that as evidence at all. But go ahead.
Oh, what I'm saying is that let's assume your theory is true and the world was created 6,000 years ago and all mutations.
My theory is true. You don't need to assume. It is true, but go ahead.
Okay, so if it's true, then bacteria and viruses have existed for the past 6,000 years, and every generation they're also experienced negative mutations, and so they're also going to die out, but they reproduce a lot faster than humans. So it seems like if your theory was true, all viruses and bacteria would have all died by now, because the same kind of reproductive cycles or the same kind of reproductive processes that happen in humans and cause genetic mutation in humans also happen for single-celled organisms and bacteria and viruses in many cases. And so they also experience the same kind of decay at the same rate for just everything, which means it seems like if your theory was true, all of those single-celled organisms would have been dead by now.
Well, I understand what you're driving at here. Again, I would point out that if they're deleterious enough, that particular one simply dies and doesn't reproduce. So no, it's not going to take over the population. Secondly, since we have never observed in the observable history, like bacteria, for example, they have a very rapid generation time. Some as short as, I think, 20 minutes. They're born, grow up, get married, and have babies in 20 minutes. So certainly there would be, like you're correct, millions and millions of generations in 6,000 years. We've never seen anything produce anything other than a bacteria. It is still a bacteria. So why would you think it was different with humans or monkeys or bananas or elephants or anything else? It's a lot less generations. With millions of generations available to observe, we cannot see these bacteria become anything other than a bacteria. Why would we think a bacteria ever turned into a dog or a hamster or a whale or a pineapple? Because it's a lot less generations. So that's why I think what you're sharing, and that probably don't even realize it, is a great example of why evolution is stupid. It doesn't work. There's no observation for it. We don't observe populations of bacteria, up to my knowledge, going extinct. There may be some particular types. I mean, you probably have 50,000 different bacteria in your gut right now. All of us do. Different bacteria, different kinds. So we don't see these bacteria ever changing into 2-celled creatures, or there are no 2-celled creatures. We don't see them ever becoming a different kind of bacteria. And to me, this is a classic example of why evolution does not work on larger animals, which have a much longer generation time.
So does that mean that you believe that bacteria and viruses have the exact same DNA now that they did at creation because they haven't experienced decay at all?
I don't think they have any new information. They may have lost some information. All known mutations, as I said, are harmful, fatal, or neutral. And to my knowledge, all of them involve a loss of information, not a gain. There may be a duplication, like polyploidy with strawberries. You know, you get the big strawberries, which taste terrible. But actually it's a doubling of the existing gene code. It's not new information. It's a doubling of the information. So I'm not aware of any viruses, any mutations that have caused any new, novel information to that variety of bacteria or virus or anything, you know, a whale or elephant. So again, it's imagination that it happens, and the evolutionists have a vivid imagination. I wish I had their faith. Their faith is incredible compared to mine, but it's not science.
Right. So you said that.
I can't say that the bacteria today are identical to the ones in the Garden of Eden. I don't know, but I think if they're not identical, the changes have been negative or neutral. There's no example, no evidence of anything becoming more improved, a new improved variety. It's not documentable.
So if bacteria are losing information with these negative, deleterious mutations, don't you think they would probably be dead if they've kept losing these over time? Or do you think it's pretty similar, just relatively close to the way it was in the creation?
Right. The individual ones are certainly dying off, and maybe some whole, herds of bacteria, whatever you call a herd or a colony or a gaggle or a pride of bacteria, they may indeed have become extinct or died off. The whole tribe may have died off. But that wouldn't affect all the ones all over the world. I mean, it's a big world. If all the bacteria in Alabama died today, that probably wouldn't affect the ones in Canada or, Argentina. It would take a while for that to be able to get around. That probably wouldn't happen. They just simply, if a species of animal dies out, like the dodo bird, okay, well, something else just fills that ecological niche. Nobody misses it. It's just gone. So I think if all the bacteria of one variety, like I said, let's assume you've got 50,000 different kinds of bacteria just in your gut right now, and I do in mine also. If one went extinct, who cares? So I think all we can observe, and probably all we can actually even imagine, is a bacteria gathering enough mutations to where it dies off. The whole kind dies off. Okay. If horses, our neighbors have 11 horses. We feed them over the fence here. If they got mutations and gradually got worse and worse, eventually all the horses in the world might die off. That's a possibility. Not a probability, but in theory, it could happen. So something else fills the niche. I don't see any evidence for evolution in that. It may be that bacteria are accumulating a genetic load like humans are, but if the load gets too great, that one dies, and the more robust ones, the ones that don't have that mutation, would take over the population.
Interesting. So essentially, that you think that bacteria are very similar to how they were in creation, with some deleterious mutations, but they're very similar, and that's.
I'd have no way to prove that, but my theory would be, yes, the bacteria originally created are still pretty much the same, just like the humans originally created are still pretty much the same, except now instead of living to be 900, we only live to be 70 or 80 or 90. So certainly there's been a deterioration in humanity, at least from all the records that people, like the Bible clearly says they live to be 900, and all the ancient records about a golden age. Why did they talk about a time when man used to live to be 1,000 and died peacefully in his sleep? There are many legends from various cultures around the world, unconnected, that have the same legend. So from a detective standpoint, that would say, this is evidence there must have been something there. There must have really lived to be 900. One argument we talked about last night on my Bible study YouTube channel, Kent Hovind Official, was what about wisdom teeth? Is that evidence for evolution? Well, the fact that about 40% of the population has to have their wisdom teeth taken out now in America may be dietary, because we don't eat as much roughage as they do in some other countries, but it may be because we're genetically inferior. And if people were indeed living to be 900 and getting bigger, let's just assume everybody was 10 or 12 feet tall and their head was bigger. Now you got room for your wisdom teeth, not a problem. So to lose, and again, that's an example of losing, not gaining. So the examples you're giving for the bacteria would be an example of a bacteria losing genetic information. If you're aware of some that where they're gaining, I'd like to see it. But so far, nobody's ever shown one.
All right, so my next question would be, how do you tell the difference between a mutation that's positive, negative, and neutral? If it's gained information, lost information, or hasn't done anything, do you have a way to tell the difference between those?
I don't, not with bacteria. It'd probably be a bacteriologist could do that. But I think with any animal, you can look at it and say, if you get a mutated animal, like we have some sheep on our property now for the kids to come pet. If they produce a baby that is mutated, there's a probability that baby will die before it reaches, reproductive age. Okay. If it gets a mutation, a baby mutated that has something beneficial, which nobody's ever observed, it would then have to find a mate of the opposite sex in the same place at the same time that has the same mutation, that beneficial thing, and they would have to crossbreed, and they'd have to take over the whole population of the world, and there's 210 varieties of sheep in the world that are capable of interbreeding, as far as I know, and billions of sheep. So it's imagination stuff that this process of a beneficial mutation, never observed, can somehow take over the population. Never observed. It's not science. It's SpongeBob imagination.
So you said you don't have a way to tell the difference. Do you know of any creationists who do have like a way to look at two genomes and tell which one has more information, which one has less?
Just to study a genome, period, what we're doing, we're looking through the microscope at a bacteria that is like so tiny. We have a model in our science center at Dinosaur Adventureland in Lenox of the motor that drives the flagellum on a bacteria. The bacteria is incredibly tiny. You can't see them without a really good microscope. And then they have a little motor that turns a hair that makes it swim. That motor is so tiny that if you took a hair off your head and cut it off, the stump of the hair would hold 8 million of those motors. That's how small they are. And yet that little motor has at least 50 different protons. It's proton driven, 50 different parts to it, and it spins 100,000 RPM. It's very difficult to get any engine to spin 100,000 RPM. I mean, the jets maybe get up there once in a while. Certainly a piston engine. I'm not aware of any piston engine gets anywhere close to that of any type. So you may get a jet engine or something. But the point is, here we have bacteria, which you are trying to use as an example of evolution, that have probably a motor that's more complex than just about anything ever built by man. And we certainly can't build one that small. This nanotechnology is phenomenal just in the motor of a bacteria's flagellum. And some have multiple hairs all over their body and can swim all directions. So they have all the motor on every hair. I think it is absolutely silly to believe such a thing could happen by chance over millions of years. It's certainly not going to come from an accumulation of mutations. Michael B. used the illustration over and over about a mousetrap. 5 basic parts on a mousetrap.
Sorry to interrupt, but my question was, do you know of any creationists who have a way to differentiate between positive, negative, and neutral mutations? I
don't know of any creationists that do that type of stuff to look, but how would you know? Just by looking under a microscope, how are you going to tell if it's positive or negative mutation? I don't know. I don't know of any, is the answer to your question.
Okay, thank you. So if I said like there is no such thing as the supernatural and everything is natural, that wouldn't be a really good methodology because something supernatural could be right in front of me. I'd just never be able to identify it, right?
True. Yeah, we cannot study. See, that's where science is limited to study things we observe, study, test, and demonstrate. There are certain things that are just outside the field of science. The supernatural would be completely outside the field of science, untestable.
Right. So if you don't have a way to differentiate between the natural and supernatural, you can't say there is no supernatural because it could be right in front of you. Well, doesn't the same thing apply to information in the gene? If you don't have a way to differentiate between positive changes and negative changes, then you also can't say there aren't any because you just don't know. It could be right in front of you and you wouldn't be able to see it.
Right. This is arguing, though, from the lack of evidence. Here's the problem. The evolutionists will say, well, we can't prove it didn't happen. Okay. But they don't understand. Theirs is a religion as much as mine is. They believe these changes happen. Bacteria slowly turn to elephants and whales and pine trees. They believe that. But it's not observable. So to say, well, we can't see it, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen, you're correct. But I wish you guys would admit this is your faith. And why do all of us in the world have to pay for your faith to be taught in the school system? Why don't you pay for my faith to be taught? You guys have had the schools for like 50 years now. Okay, it's my turn. I want everybody to pay for my religion to be taught in the schools. We've all been paying for evolution religion. I think that's long enough. And I think it's caused a lot of damage to the kids in many ways and society in general. So I think what you're doing, maybe unwittingly, is admitting that you cannot demonstrate evolution, but we should believe it anyway. Okay, that's your faith. Why can't you see that's a religion? Tom. That's not science. But go ahead.
We think we have a way to tell the difference between positive, negative, and neutral mutations. So I was just wondering if the creationists also have a way. And you said you don't know of any. If you find any, please let me know. I'd be interested in hearing that.
Let me. The only thing I can think of, the way you could tell is survivability. Does it survive and reproduce? This was Charles Darwin's theory. Those that survive and are fittest are going to survive and produce the most offspring. So that's the only way to tell. If it died, you would assume it didn't have what it took to make it, and if it lived and produced a million other bacteria, they'd say, oh, this one is more fit. That is the theory. And is that how you would tell if something is beneficial? Because it survives and improves, survives and has a lot of kids. I can't think of any other way. Do you have another way? You said you have.
Let me give you some examples and you tell me if you would call this new information. Like suppose you have a gene and it has a complete genome duplication, so it copies itself, but it's always in the same cell. And then in that copy, it has a mutation which causes it to produce a new protein that was never been seen before in this species. Would that be considered new information by your definition?
Simply developing a new protein, are you saying this protein is going to have new information? Yes. I agree that the genes, they make copies of themselves, which is an amazing process. How you guys can believe that happened by chance blows my mind, but you do believe it. Okay, so a gene makes a copy of itself, and you're saying it has a new protein. Do you have an example of this, or is this just purely hypothetical? I'm not aware of any examples. It takes place in the imagination, which goes back to why this is a faith. Evolution's a faith, not a science.
Well, there are actually lots of examples on this. If you go to PubMed.com and type in complete genome duplication, then there's like 10,000 results that pop up with published papers analyzing this. But just to clarify, so if you have a complete genome duplication in the same cell, so it has two pairs of genes in the same organism essentially, and the new pair of gene does something new and adds a new protein, which does something in the organism because all the proteins have some effect in the organism, would that qualify as new information for you or not so much?
Well, you understand that a protein is like incredibly complicated just on its own. And it is a small slice of what's inside the gene. I mean, like real tiny. So can they demonstrate that this wasn't already there and switched off and now it's just a discovery of a new function? Are you sure it's actually new? If it's brand new to that cell, where did the material come from to build it? Where did the information come from to assemble it properly? How many ways are there to assemble chemicals that do not work to make a protein?
So you wouldn't call that new information?
Yeah, trillions and trillions. So if you're saying the parts of the protein assembled themselves, that's like me saying, I looked in my garage and there was a new lawnmower forming. No, it's not going to happen. So I don't think you can demonstrate that it wasn't something that was already there but switched off, a recessive gene. Of course, we got lots of those, recessive genes. B, where's the material and is it lined up? Is it? I can drop letters on the floor and make chaos all the time, but what's the probability of me dropping letters making a word? Real slim. Probability of dropping letters making a sentence? 0. The probability of all this stuff coming together to make a protein that is functioning with new information, I think, is absolutely 0. So I will look at PubMed.com, thank you, I will check that out, but I would be willing to bet without even seeing it, they're showing things that have either been recessive and now being revealed, or a loss of information. Like you can take certain words in the English language and cut off a letter and it becomes a new word. It's a loss of a letter. I can't think of an example now. I'll put some together for my PowerPoint, but there are lots of words. If you take out a letter.
If you take the word atheist, remove the A, you get theist? Sure.
Okay, ruin, R-U-I-N. If I take out the I get run. Is that a brand new information? No. It's 3 letters that already existed in the word ruin. Just a quick thought, okay? Ruin and run. Just take out the letter I. So I think that's probably what PubMed is going to show is 10,000 examples of something where part of a protein was lost and now it made a different protein, but it didn't gather new material and it didn't gather new information. And I don't think you could prove that it's done anything that's going to take over the population through successive generations after that.
All right, let me give you some other examples. So like endosymbiosis, do you know what that is? Where one organism eats another organism, but instead of being decayed, it becomes mutated inside of it and becomes like a new organ. Did you consider that new information?
I would say that's amazing design. if you can take in something into the body of an animal and it becomes functioning part of that body, I think we all do that. You just took a drink of water or something. Are those hydrogen oxygen molecules going to then get into your body and become part of your cells? Yeah. So that's taking something in that's going to be absorbed and useful to the body. That's what eating and drinking is all about, and breathing.
So what about RNA? Would you consider RNA to have information?
RNA carries the information. It's a copy from the DNA. It's a messenger. So yes, it certainly does. Are there mutations that add new information? I'm not aware of any. Again, I would say a ruin and run is a simple example. It's probably you could find examples of RNA as it copies, it loses something and therefore makes a brand new word. It's a shorter word. It's not new information. It's scrambled of existing information.
Okay, so if RNA couldn't like self-replicate and then it has a mutation and now it can self-replicate, would that be new information?
An RNA could probably replicate information and scramble it some and maybe make a new word like run instead of ruin. But is that going to be an example that's going to drive the RNA to develop from nothing to the RNA to begin with? No. This is a dream world to think that it happens, and I know you guys really believe it happened strongly, because your only other choice is God did it. You don't want God to do it, because then might have to, bow to him. It's not that bad. I enjoy it. Anyway.
Let me give you one more example. So evolutionists believe that single-celled organisms became multicellular. Do you think that would be new information if we could see a single-celled organism become a multi-celled organism?
It would be how would it be new information? Every cell in my body, I have roughly 100 trillion of them, they all cooperate with each other and to make a human body. It's this way with all of life forms. Multi-celled organisms are a combination of millions or billions or trillions of individual cells. So is it new information? There are no examples that I'm aware of single-celled creatures. They form colonies, just like people. Individual humans with their own individual body get together and make cities and states and countries, but they don't all become one body. They're still individual bodies. So I know there's been some stuff in the news lately about some cells getting together in a colony, and they say, oh, they're developing a new function. Okay, that's like, all of our people getting together in Lenox, Alabama, deciding to build a new highway. Okay, well, is that a new function that Lenox never had before? That's not evolution. So I don't know of anything where single-celled have become multi-celled other than a colonization, a cooperation, not actually a new organism. If you know of some, I'd like to see it. And if scientists could do that in the laboratory, get a bunch of individual cells to make a new organism, that wouldn't prove it happened in nature. That would prove a bunch of scientists can do it in the laboratory. That's all it would prove.
All right, so the last four examples I gave you, we have examples of all of those. Like, for example, RNA can create itself on a form of clay. That is from a paper, The Role of, big word I can't pronounce, in a Catalyst of an RNA Synthesis, Journal of Applied Clay Science by Michael Andersley. And the second one where RNA can self-reproduce, that's in a paper by Tom Check. And the third one with evolution from single-celled to multicellular organisms comes from a paper, De Novo Origins of Multicellularity in Response to Predation by Matthew D. Herron. So all of those we have examples of.
Okay, you went too fast. I couldn't get them. I'll go back and listen to this and look those up.
If you want, I can email them to you. I have the list.
If somebody said RNA can create itself from clay, tell them, please, Kent Hovind said they're lying or they're stupid. I don't believe that for 1 second. I don't think anybody's going to believe that. Because think what you said now. RNA, which carries enormous information, can create itself from clay. Can a computer chip...
Just to clarify a little bit, I'm sorry, they don't create itself from clay. They use inorganic materials which bind to clay and form the RNA.
Okay, is this the RNA doing this by itself, or is this somebody doing something to the clay? People can do things to silicone or to quartz crystals and make it carry information.
So what's happening is that there's no RNA in the disk or whatever, and then they put in the inorganic compounds that would make RNA but haven't made RNA. They're just basic pieces, and they put in a clay molecule, and the pieces bind to the clay molecule and form RNA from nothing, just inorganic material.
Well, they're not forming it from nothing. You said they put the pieces into it.
All right. Well,
Unless
you have to have the pieces. They can't
you
physically
got to
do it
have
from
the pieces.
absolutely.
Is it possible for me to put all the parts of a tricycle in a bag and shake it and have it come out as a tricycle? Unlikely, but let's suppose it happened one time. I get all the tricycle parts, put them in a bag, shake it, and out comes a tricycle. Okay, I started with all the pieces, and I supplied energy to shake it. That's not an example of evolution. You're not answering the question, where did the parts come from, and where did the energy come from, and what good does it do if there's nothing for it to reproduce with? If you indeed produce one RNA someplace in a laboratory by this process on clay, what's it going to do? RNA carries the message of the DNA. So what good is it going to do?
Right. So the second example I gave was that RNA can reproduce itself. So RNA can be produced on clay and then reproduce itself. The first point you brought up about where did the energy and matter come from, that's the cosmological argument, and I would be happy to talk with you about that sometime too, but I kind of want to focus on just evolution right now.
Sure.
So RNA can create itself on clay with purely inorganic material, and then it can self-reproduce. And RNA is then the precursor to DNA, so it can then produce DNA.
Well, slow down. Does this RNA that's producing itself on clay require an input of energy from someplace, like, temperature or sunlight? Is it RNA producing itself on clay with no energy input, with no intelligent input, with no parts being put onto it? Where did the clay come from? Where did the parts come from? Where did the energy come from? And how do you know it's information? We have to compare it to something that we see and say, oh, that makes sense. Like dropping letters makes a variety of letters in a row may not make any sense. There are billions of ways to arrange English letters that make no sense at all. There's specific ways to make them make sense, a word in the English language or French or something, but to get them to arrange themselves in a word, something that makes sense and is useful, I think the chances are real close to zero. And as far as all the parts of an RNA molecule doing this, I'm not going to buy it. They're going to have to really prove that to me.
Well, these are things.
A long history of making these grandiose statements. Well, hey, yeah, of course it happened. Don't look behind that curtain, boys and girls. There's this man in there pulling levers with smoke and mirrors. That's all evolution is. It's a little old man behind the curtain pulling levers, and they're trying to say, oh, look, we made RNA. No, you didn't make RNA. You put all the parts in, you supplied the energy, you supplied the clay. That's not creating RNA for sure. But I'll read the article, and thank you for that.
Well, from my understanding, it's kind of like what would happen on the early Earth. The energy comes from the sun. The materials are already there in the Earth, and so they're kind of like reproducing something similar to what happened on the early Earth. So
which again makes the question, where did the Earth come from for this to happen on? That would be the clay. Where did the materials come from? And where did the energy come from? Where did the sun come from? You really have a serious problem. Hey, Dinosaur Adventureland in the background. Awesome.
Yeah, I noticed that. It's kind of distracting all my camera stuff.
You're good, Steve. Go ahead.
So I would love to talk with you about the cosmological argument some other time. I do have answers to all those. I can give you where those came from, but I really want to focus on evolution here for the moment. So
before you do, Tom, what do you mean by that word evolution?
Microevolution. So just microevolution. I'm pretty sure I told you this in our last one, but yeah, I just accept microevolution, which is just changes in allele frequency, those kinds of things.
Change in allele frequencies, okay. Which means you have to have the alleles coming from somewhere.
Right.
You start with alleles and get changes.
Right.
Do you start with nothing and get the alleles, or do you start with something already existing?
You're starting with the already existing matter, and the already existing matter produces the RNA on the clay, and the RNA reproduces itself, which then produces DNA.
And you think that process will drive a bacteria to a whale over billions of years? I'll give you trillions.
It'll create a bacteria.
You think it would?
Yes.
You have great faith. Great. You have enough faith if you'd apply it the right direction to become a child of God and do something for God with your life. You definitely got the faith already. It's misapplied.
Well, so we have two different explanations here. One is the creationist explanation and the evolutionist explanation. And they're competing explanations. How do we tell which one is the better explanation? Because from my perspective...
Yeah, mine's the better one. But go ahead.
Well, so from my perspective, everyone can explain all the past and present data. Like if we saw a cup fall over and I said a mouse did it, well, I can just say, yeah, okay, the mouse knocked over the cup and look, all the mouse droppings. I can totally explain that. But if I said a mouse didn't knock over the cup, I could say a mouse left the droppings and then something else knocked over the cup. So everyone can explain all of the past and present data. But the way to tell the best explanation is to make novel future predictions about things we don't know yet. If you have a theory that can predict into the future about something we don't know, that's really good evidence to show it's not just one of the infinitely many imaginary things we can come up with in our head. And evolution seems to do that a lot, about fossils, where we're going to find them, when we're going to find them, on what layer we're going to find them, predictions about evolution and genes. They make lots and lots of future predictions. And so that seems to be good reason for me to believe this is not one of the imaginary ones. And I don't know of any predictions that the creationist model makes to give us reason to believe it's not one of the imaginary ones.
Okay, let's suppose we came from a different planet, landed on this earth, and somebody handed us a Bible and said, read this. And before we even, just sit down on the planet and start reading, this book says, wow, there was a worldwide flood that killed everything. Just from that, I think I could make a prediction. We may find some fossils in these layers under our feet. There may be some evidence of animals that died in this flood. This book is saying there was a flood that covered the world and killed everything except people on the boat. Oh, let's start digging. I think fossils are evidence of the flood. They're not evidence of evolution. Fossils don't form today in any numbers. As far as I know, none. How many animals died yesterday in the world? Billions. How many fossilized? None. They have to be buried in specific conditions like mud to be preserved to fossilize. So I think we could make predictions based on the Bible. If we had never done any digging at all, we would say, wow, I bet there's going to be fossils down there. I bet we should find, as the flood water runs off, I bet we would find canyons. And we certainly find canyons. I bet we would find erosion features. I bet we would predict from the Bible, mentioning this worldwide flood, that we might find fossils on top of the tall mountains, and we certainly do. So I think you're completely backwards in this, that all the predictions could be, millions of predictions could be made just from the Bible story. For instance, the Bible says 20 times in the first 7 chapters, all the plants and animals are going to bring forth after their kind. I think we could predict that all we're ever going to see is dogs produce dogs, cows produce cows, and there's nothing in between. And cows are not capable of mating with dogs. It can't be done. So I think we could predict that there will be variations within the kind, big dog, little dog, but there's a barrier, a border. You can't go past that border, kind, whatever that is. So I think we could make lots of predictions from the Bible. So the Bible would be an excellent book. The Bible predicts what happened, how the world was created, all the animals and plants within a few days of each other. Oh, well, then I bet there might be symbiotic relationships where certain plants require certain animals and vice versa. And there are millions and millions of symbiotic relationships. That is predictable from the Bible story before you ever step off your spacecraft. Just sit down, read the book, and you say, well, I can go on all day on this, but I think you're mistaken. If you think evolution makes predictions, they're taking the variations within the kind, like the big dog, little dog, and going wild in their imagination and say, aha, this proves dogs and bacteria are related, which is just not true.
Let me give you some examples.
Based on the evolution theory, what predictions would you make?
So Robert Broom,
you're right.
So Robert Broom predicted that Annamites will double-hinged jaw joints, like a transition between reptile and mammal, will be discovered, and it was discovered later after he predicted this in mammals such as Probagnathus. So he didn't just predict the fossil, he predicted exactly what the fossil is going to look like or some feature of the fossil and where it's going to be. That's pretty good. Like, I don't think you can make those kinds of predictions with creationism. These are very precise. And I've got a list of these right now.
Now, hold on a minute. I think we could. I don't know that particular one. Your jaw joint was different on what was it?
He predicted that there would be a double-hinged jaw joint in between a transition between a reptile and a mammal, and it was discovered in the fossil of Probagnathus.
I'll have to look that one up and see, but I think if you have to go back and realize in any honest court of law, no fossils would count. If he found a fossil of an animal with a double-hinged jaw joint, could that be something that simply went extinct, is no longer available on the planet? You don't know that it's a transition between two different kinds.
Oh, right. I apologize. That's not the argument. The argument here is that if he assumes that evolution is true, he can project into the future and predict something that he doesn't know yet. And the fact that he got that right is good evidence that that's a good model. It's not.
Let me give you another prediction. I would predict we get off there. We're sitting on our spacecraft. We haven't even got off yet. We're sitting on planet Earth. We're reading the Bible. Talks about a flood killing everything. And we see changes that people went from 900 down to 70 years old. Something changed. I bet we'll find lots of extinction on this planet. If we start digging, we're probably going to find animals in the fossil record that are no longer alive today. Dodo bird, okay? So the fact that he found a double hinge, and I'm not familiar with the details on this one, is not proof it's transition between anything. No animal today goes from single hinge to double hinge. There are no living examples of this happening. You're digging up a bone in the dirt, which you can't even prove had any children. You certainly can't prove that one had different children. You can't even, anyway, and who's this new improved double hinge joint going to marry And you're back to the bacteria example. You're thinking that is somehow, because that's improved, going to take over the population. How many animals today are still alive and doing fine that do not have a double hinge joint? Like most of them. So the fact that he predicted a double hinge joint, and I'll read up on the details here, I would say that's a lucky guess. As far as where you find it, we find fossils all over the world. On top of Mount Everest, they found them in Antarctica under the ice. I think that's more evidence of a flood. Much better scientific explanation of what happened was a global flood. Noah's in the ark for a year. I don't know how long Lennox was underwater, maybe a couple of months, 6 months, I don't know. But there are rounded rocks all over. I live on a gravel pit. We have trillions of rounded rocks. I think I could predict that this flood, because of the tide, would roll the rocks back and forth, and we'd find gravel all over the world in rounded form. I Googled yesterday, where are gravel pits found? And it said something to the effect of there's almost always a gravel pit within 50 miles, or the ability to get gravel of any place on the earth. If you wanted to build highways and wherever you live, you could say, where's the nearest place to get gravel? I bet there's a place within 50 miles of you that you can get gravel to make your concrete or whatever. So I think I could predict there'll be gravel all over the world from Noah's flood, and sand dunes and windblown sand and cross-bedding and polystrata fossils. I think I could make millions of predictions if I had not stepped out of my spacecraft yet and say, wow.
Let me just clarify a little bit. So if we have two people and one person makes a prediction that there's going to be a guy named Bob standing off somewhere in that direction, and another guy makes a prediction there's going to be a guy named Bob exactly 500 feet in that direction, which one of those is a better explanation? Which one of those is like...
Oh, yeah, the more detail for your prediction, the better. The Bible predicted Jesus would be born of a virgin in Bethlehem from the tribe of, it gives hundreds of things about the birth of Jesus Christ. Predictions thousands of years before it happened. Wow. And then it happens. Oh, and then it said he shall be called a Nazarene from Nazareth. Well, he was born in Bethlehem, but raised in Nazareth. Two different little bitty towns in a little bitty country that's smaller than New Hampshire. So I think if you want to get into predictions, I think you're going to lose this battle quickly, because the Bible has lots of predictions, including what's coming in the future, including what's going to happen to you when you die. It's all predicted in that book. I'd be willing, you think you ought to read that and listen carefully to what he said.
I've actually read the Bible from cover to cover multiple times, and most of the predictions seem very vague. They're kind of like the example of there's some guy named Bob standing in that direction, whereas the predictions from evolution are very precise. They say there's going to be a fossil exactly at this layer with exactly these features of like this jaw joint or this feather structure or whatever, and it's going to be exactly in between these kinds of two fossils, which are going to be on this layer and this layer. They make extremely precise predictions, whereas I don't think the ones in the Bibles are very precise.
I'll have to read up on that. I'm not familiar with that particular one. If you can send Steve the link of where you found that.
Absolutely. I can just I'll send you that as soon as we're done.
Now, are you saying if we have a very complex animal with a single hinge jaw, which most animals are, and it's going to develop a double hinge jaw, I assume to be able to open bigger, was that the purpose of it? You know, some animals with a double hinge jaw simply can open their jaw bigger, like most snakes can do that, okay? Many snakes can do that. Are you saying that that is an example of new information that came from somewhere?
No,
you have to not only have the double hinge jaw, you got to have the muscles to control it and the nerves to control it. This would be a real complicated change. Is it more logical to believe something was designed with a single hinge, something was designed with a double hinge, and one of them, we found a fossil of it going extinct?
Or so the only argument I'm making is that if you assume evolution is true, you can make this prediction and discover it in the future. So I'm not saying anything about evolution or whether or not this jaw joint was evolved or whatever. I'm only saying that if we assume evolution is true, we can make this prediction a long time, which is an extremely precise prediction, and then we can discover it in the future and it's right. And we can make lots and lots and lots of these. So like Robert Broom made the one about the double hinge jaw joint. Richard Alexander made the one about eusocial insects. William Bede predicted that birds with asymmetrical flight patterns will have them on the back legs, which we found in Microraptor. Tiktaalik, I'm sure you're familiar with Tiktaalik. That was another one where they predicted exactly the right layer in exactly the right area. I mean, so all of these examples are really, really precise predictions that you can make if they assume evolution is true. And you can make them before knowing them and then discover them to be correct really consistently. That seems like the precise prediction of saying Bob is exactly 500 feet over there.
I understand. I appreciate your great faith. But to this, again, you're dealing with fossils. Why don't you do this with a living animal? I predict every farmer in the entire world will tell you cows produce cows. There are no exceptions.
But that's not a future prediction. That's something we already know. You have to make a prediction of something we don't know yet.
Okay. I predict if all the scientists in the world get all the bacteria in their laboratory and nuke them and microwave them and x-ray them and raise the temperature, lower the temperature, raise the pressure, lower the pressure, they'll always produce a bacteria. I predict you will never be able to get a bacteria into anything like a whale in any amount of time in any laboratory on the planet.
Well, that's not a prediction. Prediction, you mean you have to predict something that will happen, not something that won't happen.
Okay. I predict they will always remain bacteria. I predict the cow's offspring will always remain cows. I predict the dog offspring will always remain dogs. That's my prediction from Kent Hovind on the 20th of March, 2019.
Well, that's like saying Bob is somewhere in that direction. Because there's no like stopping point, you're just saying forever. It's not really a precise prediction. You have to say this will happen. This specific thing will happen under these conditions.
Okay. Today, March 20th, 2019, every animal on the planet will produce babies that are the same kind as itself. That's my prediction. You will find no exceptions to that. The birds will have baby birds. The cows will have baby cows. That's my prediction.
Well, I totally agree with that, but that's not a prediction. Like if I said the sun will rise tomorrow, that's something we already know. You can't predict something we already know because that's not a prediction. To be a prediction.
Well, you already know that every animal produces the same kind. Why do you believe it was different in the past?
Well, evolution actually also says that every animal will produce of the same kind. But that's a slightly different topic. So, but can you make any future testable predictions of things we do not know yet?
Or do you believe this bacteria millions of years, billions of years ago turned into, do you believe a whale and a pine tree have a common ancestor which was single-celled? And was that single cell a whale or a pine tree? And if not, did it turn into something that was not the same kind? You got
it backwards. So the whale and the pine tree are both still the kind of the single cell. The single cell is like if you start with a bacteria that evolves into a fish, the fish will still be made of bacteria. And if you have that bacterial fish that evolved into like a lizard, then that lizard will still be the fish bacteria. It never loses the things. It's always the same things.
Right. Now let me try to get you to see what you just said. Bacteria turned into fish and turned into pineapples, let's say. Okay.
Well, this is hypothetical. It didn't actually happen. Bacteria didn't do this, but yeah.
Okay, a single-celled creature turned into a fish, and a different one turned into a pineapple. So fish and pineapple are related because they both come from a single-celled creature. And yet today, fish only produce fish and pineapples only produce pineapples. So somewhere in the past, something happened that is not observable today. It is not observable to have any animal or plant produce anything other than its kind. You believe it happened in the past, but you can't see it happen in the present, and you certainly predict it won't happen in the future. You've got to be kidding if you believe it happened in the past. That's faith, incredible faith.
All I believe is in microevolution, so the only thing I believe in is in small changes in microevolution of changes in allele frequency through reproduction. And we do see that today. But again, going back to my question, can you make any future novel testable predictions of things we don't know yet, not things we do know yet, that creationism can make?
All right, the Bible says clearly that Eve is the mother of all living. I predict they will not find evidence of life anyplace on other planets. None. They've been looking, what's the SETI project? How long they've been doing that, listening, taxpayers paying for people to sit at a telescope listening for evidence from outer space. Never happened. It's not going to happen. I predict it won't happen. Now, there may be, because the Bible teaches there are demonic spirits, there may be some impersonation kind of stuff where, like there's plenty of hoaxes and frauds about, Bigfoot and Sasquatch and stuff. So there may be somebody, pulling a hoax on somebody, but I don't think there'll be any scientific evidence of any life on other planets. And they've been searching quite a while now. I predict they keep searching. They won't find any.
Well, that's an interesting prediction. I definitely like that one, but it's still just something we won't happen. Can you predict something that will happen? That's like a thing that if evolution or if creationism is true, we will be able to search in this location and find this thing of something like that, a positive prediction.
I predict, as far as finding things in the fossils and in the ground, digging in the dirt, I think we'll find evidence worldwide of a flood. Everything can be interpreted in terms of a flood. The stratification, the upside down petrified trees running upside down, different layers. How does the evolution explain that? But the Bible says very clearly in the end of time, you won't be able to buy or sell without a mark. That's quite a prediction from 2,000 years ago. I predict you will see in the near future, I'm going to say, I don't know at the time, a few years, cash will become obsolete. If you had a pocket full of Confederate money right now and go to any store and say, look, I got $10,000 in Confederate money, what can I buy? They would say nothing. It's useless. I predict the money we have in our pocket today will become completely valueless. It'll be a piece of paper worth nothing coming soon. You're going to have a chip, just like in credit cards, only this time it's going to have to be in the right hand. I predict there'll be a time coming soon when you cannot buy or sell unless you have a chip in your hand or in your forehead. That's my prediction. Watch it happen.
That's a pretty good prediction. I like that, and I think that'll probably not happen.
Revelation 13. And I predict that chip will have to have a particular series of numbers that includes a 666. Steve, you got anything with a barcode on it? Anything?
Yeah.
Give me something here. Back in 1973, when they developed the barcode, you can Google this yourself, the early barcode, there you go, can of Coke, Paula Coke. No, give me 10 items, I'll find it. Okay, there you go. Unicorn meat, wow, okay. If you look at any barcode, the first two skinny lines are longer than the rest. They hang down below. In the middle, there are two skinny lines hanging down below. At the end, there are two skinny lines hanging down below. Two skinny lines with a single white space between them. You want to zoom in on that, brother? You can't do that, can you? Okay. Now, if you look at the history of the barcode in 1973, they decided they needed the first half of the barcode to be something for the company to use. So they developed a series that these lines and spaces mean something, and it gives the numbers, 0 through 9. They would say the second half will be assigned to the whoever's building that product. So they have a different way. There are two different ways to make a number 1. There are two different ways to make a number 6. The first two are always skinny lines coming down here. The middle two are two skinny lines, and the last two are two skinny lines. You look it up. That is the computer code for 6. Every barcode, unless they use the shortened version, which has 3 skinny lines, which is 66. Every computer barcode, unless it's an in-house code for that company, they make up their own, starts with a 6, has a 6 in the middle, and a 6 at the end. I think that's fascinating, and I think you're going to see something in the microchip that'll have to go in your right hand, not on. All the new Bible versions say on the hand. King James Bible says it'll go in the hand. I think it'll be an injectable chip, just like they do in dogs at the dog pound now. You can take your pet to any vet, and they'll inject a microchip, and you can locate it if it gets lost. Steve, what's that chip you can put on the car? If somebody steals your car, you can track it. GPS chip. This is all in the last 30 years, okay? It's pretty incredible. This was written, Revelation chapter 13, written 2,000 years ago. That's a pretty good prediction. I predict you, Tom, will stand before God one day and have to give an account for every word you've ever spoken. Matthew 12:34. Every word is going to be read back for the whole world to see. And when God says, Tom, you're guilty, everybody's going to nod their head and say, he's guilty, which would apply to everybody. Problem is, I don't want mine read in front of everybody. I will hope you don't either. So I accepted God's payment for my sin. And my book's clear. He erased it. The blood of Jesus Christ wiped out my sins. Praise God. But I predict, and if you don't, Tom, in time, I'm going to be able to hear every word you've ever spoken in your lifetime and every thought you've ever thought during your entire life. I predict the whole world is going to get to hear that. My prediction.
That's your best prediction so far. Unfortunately, we can't test it while still alive. So it's
correct. Too late then.
So just what you said earlier about where does the matter and energy come from? I personally believe in something like pantheism. We can have an eternal, all-powerful universe or eternal, all-powerful nature without a God. And so just like you believe God is all-powerful and eternal, the universe could be all-powerful and eternal without a consciousness. So that's where I would say that the energy comes from to create life.
So where did this universe get started? Where did this energy originate? You're telling us it's here now. Where did time, space, and matter come from? You didn't give an answer to that. You're saying it's here and it works good. Well, that's like somebody finding a car with the keys in it and say, whoa, I'm going to take this.
I would say they would be created by pantheism. So pantheism exists prior to space, time, and matter, just like you believe God does. And then pantheism created the time, space, and matter with quantum fluctuations.
Okay. This is not science, you realize. This is your religion.
Correct. I'm using it as an alternative to theism.
Yeah, it's an ism, no question. So you believe matter is God, or time, or space, or the combination of the three. That would be your Holy Trinity, time, space, matter. And I believe God created those three things, time, space, matter. Okay, you can believe what you want, but I just think the audience needs to see what you have is a religious belief, which you're welcome to have. I don't think it'll do well for you Judgment Day. I don't think it makes common sense. I don't think it's science. And I certainly don't think you ought to make all of us pay for that to be taught in the schools, but that is what's being taught in the schools, and it's completely unfair.
Well, pantheism is taught in schools. Pantheism is completely something separate that I just made up to be an alternative to theism. So my point is just
evolution builds on that.
I don't think so. I think evolution and pantheism are separate theories. But so my point is that you can explain the energy that created the universe and the energy that's used to create life without a God. You don't need a God for those things.
I disagree. You believe energy created life forms on Earth. It's not observable. It's certainly not science. It's a religious faith. Energy, you can add energy. If I fill the trunk of my car full of gasoline and light it, it's going to put a lot of energy out, but it's not going to move the car anywhere. You have to have a very complex mechanism called an engine, drivetrain, transmission, differential, etc., to use that energy, to take that energy and transmit it into something useful. It is a really complicated process. To take sunlight energy and use it requires an extremely complex molecule called chlorophyll. You and I can't use the sunlight's energy for much of anything, make a little vitamin D out of it, but basically it would kill us if that's all we had. We have to have chlorophyll. So if you're saying energy is going to create things, you're absolutely blind. Energy destroys things unless there's a mechanism to use it. We only got 2 minutes left. Steve's got to go, but go ahead, Tom. Anything else?
Well, no, my point was that in the beginning or a while back, you asked, where does the matter and energy to create the clay comes from? And I can get that matter and energy without a God. Just like you explain it with a God, I can explain it without a God.
Okay. I don't think you can explain it without a God. Make me some matter out of nothing. Get a jar of nothing and turn it into anything. Make me a marble. Make me a bead. Make anything out of nothing. I don't think you can do it.
Well, I would ask, how does God do it? And then however God does it, I can create a natural process that can do it too.
You think you could? So you're God? I thought it was Tom. Gee whiz. I'm honored to meet you. Well, let's do this again sometime. I'll be glad to do it. If you want to get into the cosmological argument, we can do that. We appreciate you coming. If folks want to get a hold of you, do you want to give out any information for you? Do you have an atheist club or something? Or
oh, this is actually broadcast on my YouTube channel, so everyone sees it from my space, from my view.
Okay. What's your YouTube channel? We'll advertise it on mine too. What's your YouTube?
T-Jump, T-J-U-M-P. That's my initials. So
T-Jump, YouTube. That's it. Just T-Jump, huh?
Yep. And
mine is Kent Hovind Official. And zoom into ours and tell your friends about it. And my phone number, if you want to talk to me personally, 855-BIG-DINO, extension 3. I take lots of calls every day. Be glad to talk with you. Thank you, Tom. Let's do it again sometime.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming on. I really enjoy having conversations.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.